This morning I woke up wanting to ask you this. Have you ever stood in the aftermath of a broken relationship and wondered, will anything ever be the same again? Maybe you've lost trust in someone close, faced betrayal, or drifted apart from a friend or family member. If that's you, take heart, because today we're talking about the power of restoration. You see, broken relationships are not the end of the story. In fact, they often signal the beginning of something greater. When God steps in to restore what's been lost, He doesn't just bring things back to how they were, He makes them better. And if you've been waiting for a breakthrough, restoration might be the first sign that God's blessings are on their way. In the book of the prophet Joel, God issues a curious declaration: I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten. Although such an image might sound weird when you first hear it, this promise is not just about material things or lost opportunities. It's about hearts mended, trust rebuilt, and relationships that become stronger than they were before. Restoration is God's way of preparing the ground for His favor to flourish. Today, let's dive deep into this idea, what restoration really means, why it's so essential to our healing, and how it paves the way for God's bigger plans in our lives. There is always a blessing behind restored relationships. Joel's prophecy reminds us that restoration comes right before blessing. If you've ever experienced the miraculous repair of a fractured relationship, you know that it doesn't just bring relief, it sparks hope. God's restoration isn't limited to healing emotional wounds. It's a signal that better things are coming. Restoring what was broken shows us that His presence is near. But here's the catch. Many of us don't recognize restoration for what it is. Instead, we get trapped by assumptions that delay our healing. There are misconceptions about restoration that block our healing. One of the biggest misconceptions about God's restoration is that it will be quick, easy, and painless. We expect apologies to come smoothly, broken trust to heal overnight, and relationships to fall back into place without struggle. But God's restoration doesn't always look like that. It requires patience, humility, and sometimes confrontation with uncomfortable truths. Another common mistake is thinking that restoration means things will look exactly as they did before the fracture. We assume that healed relationships must operate the same way, with the same people, dynamics, or expectations. But God's restoration isn't about copying the past. It's about making all things new. If we cling too tightly to old ways, we might miss the beauty of what God is trying to rebuild in our lives. Lastly, some people fear that restoring relationships means letting their guard down entirely. This is where emotional barriers form. We avoid restoration because we think it makes us vulnerable or weak. But God's kind of restoration is not about erasing boundaries. It's about creating healthy ones. Restoration teaches us to love wisely and fully without being held captive by fear. These misconceptions delay healing and leave us stuck in cycles of hurt. But once we embrace what restoration really means, we unlock the door to something extraordinary: wholeness. Restoration is used by God as the pathway to healing and wholeness. Here's where the truth gets exciting. God doesn't just restore relationships to make us feel better. He restores relationships to heal our hearts and prepare us for His greater purposes. Restoration is part of the divine blueprint. It's how God clears the emotional clutter so we can walk boldly into what's next. When broken relationships are restored, something powerful happens inside us. First, we experience emotional healing that strengthens our faith. Forgiveness loosens the grip of bitterness, freeing us to receive God's love more deeply. Then we grow in humility and grace, learning to give others the same mercy God has given us. Restoration makes us more like Christ. Finally, we become whole, with hearts ready to embrace new opportunities and connections. When old wounds are healed, we're no longer bound by the past, we're open to the future. God uses restored relationships as stepping stones to launch us into His greater plans. Whether it's healing in a marriage, a long-lost friendship renewed, or peace between family members, every restored relationship carries a purpose beyond itself. It's a sign that God is not done with us yet. Restoration signals that something beautiful is on the horizon. What then would be the key takeaways on the restoration of relationships? The most crucial thing you should remember is that restoration of relationships is often the first sign of God's blessings on the way. It's a signal that He is near and at work in your life. Also, remember that there are some misconceptions about God's restoration, like expecting it to be quick or thinking it's a return to the past. Such misconceptions are powerful enough to hinder emotional healing. So you need to let go of those assumptions. Finally, restoration brings healing, humility, and wholeness because it prepares you for God's greater purposes. When your heart is free from old wounds, you are ready to step into His plans with boldness. Now, I want to leave you with this challenge. If there's someone you have grown distant from, someone God may be nudging you to reconnect with, take the first step. Pray for them. Reach out with a kind word, or simply release the hurt in your heart. True, restoration doesn't always mean everything will return to how it was, but it does mean that God is working on something better. I'd love to hear your thoughts. How has God's restoration shown up in your life? Drop your reflections in the comments below and join the conversation. And if this message spoke to you, be sure to watch the other videos in this series for more encouragement and inspiration. Remember, God's blessings are near when relationships are restored. Are you ready to receive them?